watching Business World Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Wednesday. It's final, PEZA yields to the government. The agency orders IT BPO firms located within eco-zones to return to work by April 1st.
The Transportation Department is now preparing measures to help airlines and shipping companies on the back of incessant fuel price hikes.
And the Asian Development Bank teams up with the Labor Department for an employment recovery program in the Philippines.
We begin our broadcast with PEZA now directing all IT BPO firms registered with them to return to the office by April 1st.
This is in contrast with the agency's earlier stance of pushing for an extension of the remote work setup for IT BPO companies. PEZA says they understand the concerns raised by investors and employees who are affected by the return to on-site work order, but said these companies have to follow the law to avoid losing tax perks. PEZA Director General Charito Plaza says that at present, the agency cannot change the on-site work ratio unless the laws will be amended to incorporate hybrid schemes. The Fiscal Incentives Review Board had previously allowed IT BPO firms located in economic zones to implement a work-from-home setup for up to 90% of their total workforce while still enjoying tax incentives. That arrangement will expire tomorrow, March 31. PEZA had been pushing for the extension of the remote work setup on the back of soaring oil prices and the continued threat of COVID-19.
Meanwhile, the Transportation Department is preparing measures to help airlines and shipping firms cope with the rising oil prices. Secretary Art Tugade says these measures will avoid the collection of higher fuel surcharges. Tugade has been opposing the idea of higher fuel surcharges, saying these will drive up airfares at a time when the industry is still recovering from the pandemic. Now, instead of allowing airlines to impose a fuel surcharge, Tugade said airport fees for airlines should be waived. The department is looking at providing subsidies for shipping firms to offset the impact of the higher fuel prices on their operations.
And still on higher pump prices, S&P Global Ratings says the Philippines is one of the countries in Asia Pacific that would be most affected by the surge in energy and commodity prices caused by the Russia-Ukraine war. S&P said regional inflation pressures would be most keenly felt by the largest net energy importers, which includes the Philippines. Nomura Global Markets Research, meanwhile, classified the Philippines among the commodity-dependent group of emerging markets that will benefit once commodity prices decline. Although Nomura said that the Philippines is also among resilient emerging markets due to our limited trade exposure to Russia and Ukraine. Recall that the S&P earlier trimmed its GDP growth estimate for the Philippines this year to 6.5% from 7%. On the other hand, Nomura forecasts the Philippine economy to grow by 6.3%. BPI Asset Management and Trust Corporation has launched the first sustainable fund suite in the Philippines. BPI AMTC has developed 3 new unit investment trust funds that seek to address issues such as climate change, renewable energy, and resource efficiency, all while seeking to deliver long-term financial returns. Each fund in the BPI Invest Sustainable Fund Suite will be invested in a portfolio of global target funds that invest in companies that adhere to the highest ESG standards. How ripe is the Philippines as a market for sustainable investment products? Let's talk more about BPI's Invest Sustainable Fund Suite with Alan Martin D, Head of Investment Solutions at BPI Asset Management and Trust Corporation. Good morning, Alan. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Jess. Good morning. Good morning, Danny. Good morning to all the viewers. Thanks for having us here, and thank you for the time.
All right. Sure. Why come up with a new product now when there's so much uncertainty and volatility here? And how do you see this new sustainable fund at least bolstering investor confidence?
Yeah, admittedly, there has been a lot of challenges lately in the market. We just came from a pandemic, and we are still in a pandemic, health pandemic. You have geopolitical events in the EU and with Russia and Ukraine. but having said that, we think we're generally optimistic in the long run for markets. We think sustainable assets, sustainable investing has become more important um, because there's so many risks involved in investing. Um, Gone are the days that you simply look at the bottom line of a company or simply look at the financials and financial performance of the company. You have to look at companies you invest in holistically and looking at the E, S, and G, the environment, the social, and the governance factors have become more so important. So we think that sustainability has a long way to go, and we encourage clients to look into these investments because you're not only going to get good financial returns, you're also contributing positively to the environment and to the world.
Okay, Alan, I'm very, very excited about this. Obviously, it's something that I personally, am very interested in. But to what extent is this no longer a niche kind of investment? For people that have extra money, that want to help the environment, want to do good, and to what extent is this, something commercial, something that you can peg against other UITFs
viable?
in the market? Is it competitive enough? Do you have a big enough market that is interested in putting their money in these type of funds?
Yeah, it's a great question, Danny. Admittedly, in the Philippines, ESG and sustainability is relatively new, and it's definitely not as mainstream as it is in developed markets like Europe, some of our more developed Asian neighbors. But definitely, in the Philippines, it is not mainstream. We think that over the longer period, sustainable assets and sustainable investments are going to comprise bulk of the whole global asset management industry. To date, there's about 30 to 40 trillion in ESG assets globally out of 150 trillion. Everyone's expecting this number to grow, and definitely over time, it's not going to be a niche asset. Again, in the past, we can rely on financial metrics alone to look at companies, but it's becoming more important now to look at all these risks and understand all these risks when making an investment in any type of asset. So definitely it has a long way to go, and definitely more and more fund managers are going to adopt these principles moving forward.
How will you position this in terms of risk and return, Alan? Is this, a more premium kind of fund? In the previous types of ESG funds, you sort of expect that you're not going to get the highest return because the, sin stock, so to speak, give a lot of returns. If you're invested in oil right now, you would be getting a lot of returns, and these avoid these kinds of investments. So would you expect this to be a more long-term, lower risk type of investment, or can you say these are actually similar, or you can already say that this might perform better even than the other funds out there?
Yeah, definitely there has been a track record to show that some of these investments in sustainable assets have performed better than standard benchmarks or standard indices. What we've done here is we really created different products to cater to different risk profiles, as you say. We're creating a full suite, and we're the first asset management company locally to create a full suite. We're creating a fixed income, a balanced, and a pure equity strategy to cater to the different risk profiles. So if you're more conservative and want a bit of your principal intact, so we have a fixed income product. If you want that with a little bit of growth, we have a balanced portfolio. And finally, for the ones who can take more risk, we have a full equity product. And that's really why we decided to launch the full suite to cater to the different preferences and risk appetites of our investors.
Now, earlier, Alan, just want to pick up on one point that you mentioned earlier. Admittedly, it's still pretty much a niche market here in the Philippines. But when it comes to investing in ESG assets, when do you see the country catching up with the rest of the globe? And at the same time, how does that play in when it comes to your targets here for your new product? And how does this play in as well on your current state of investments and investors?
Yeah, great question. In the Philippines, so I think we're definitely behind developed markets, but I think in the past few years we've taken big steps, and it's really a function of both the private and the public sector. As you know, the BSP launched a new circular requiring banks to have an ESG framework. the SEC, and this is as far back as 2019, I believe, where they are requiring listed companies and public companies to start disclosing on their ESG and sustainability practices. So it's a start. It's a great start. Definitely, there is a lot of catching up to do in the Philippines, but at least we have our policymakers starting and coming up with regulations to support. And of course, it's up to us in the private sector to take these things seriously. And really, that's what we're trying to do at BPI AMTC. We're educating our clients about the importance of ESG, and we're launching products to cater to these investment requirements.
Alan, to our understanding, so this was just launched yesterday, no? It's a global fund, right? So there are more global companies that are sustainable. What about here in the Philippines? And do you have plans to launch some sort of domestic ESG fund? Do we have even enough companies that would fit the bill?
Yeah, it's a great question, Danny, and it's something that we have been thinking about in BPI AMTC. We started with the global strategy because we think that markets are more developed. There's a whole universe to invest in, whether it's clean energy, renewable resource, financial inclusion. There's so many companies out there globally. And then that's why we launched the global funds first. But down the road, it is in our pipeline to actually look at Philippine markets as well. We think that with the regulations from the BSP and the SEC, that more and more companies are going to start disclosing about their sustainability practices and going to embrace ESG more and more. So in time, definitely we're looking to launch peso-denominated as well as Philippine-based investment products as well.
All right, of course, Alan, before we let you go and give you this time, why should investors invest in the product, and which areas do you suggest they invest in?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I would recommend all products, but again, it depends on the client's risk profile. And that's why the good thing about our products is we launched a full suite to cater to the different risk profiles. Admittedly, sustainability is just beginning here, but we think it has a lot of room to grow. And we think that in the long run, you're not only getting financial return, but you're also helping society and the world in general.
Okay, great. Congratulations on the launch of that, and looking forward to seeing how that fund grows. Of course, that was Alan Martin D, Head of Investment Solutions at BPI Asset Management and Trust.
Now, coming right up after the break, Cebu Pacific expects its domestic capacity to return to pre-pandemic levels by next month.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
You're still watching Business World live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Dan, while the index closed lower on Tuesday on profit-taking and rate hike bets, a reversal is in the offing if we are to look at Asia's open amid some promising news on what is hopefully an imminent end to the Russia-Ukraine war. Tell us more.
That is definitely what we are all hoping for, Jess. As you mentioned here, look at the indices yesterday overnight over in Wall Street. Nasdaq up by 1 8/10, S&P 500 up by 1 2/10%. And like you mentioned, apart from Japan, it's actually a sea of green here over in Asia, from the Hang Seng over to China and Singapore. Now, as you mentioned, this is as hopefully there is going to be a de-escalation in the war in Ukraine. And that has checked the advance in oil prices. Russia has said it will sharply reduce military activity near Kyiv in Ukraine, and that they will be taking steps to de-escalate the conflict. However, we need to be, of course, very cautious. The talks have failed to reach an agreement on a ceasefire. Pentagon in the U.S. says Kyiv remains under threat, and some are saying they're distrusting Russia's words. Let's take a look, however, at how we are jumping on the back of that. Up by 0.2% this morning, firming up above 7,100 levels here after we had slid yesterday on the back of a 5-day rally previous to that. Let's take a look at a couple of stocks that are very positive right now. Take a look at GT Cap, that's up by 2.2%. And take a look at that year to date. It's seeming to come back to a reversal. This as they reported core net income jumping by 48% in 2021 to 11 billion pesos, driven by the growth in banking and automotive. Now, when we talk about automotive, of course, we're talking about Toyota Motor. They recorded, get this, 82% increase in net income to 6.2 billion pesos in 2021. So maraming bumibili ng kotse last year. They actually said that vehicle sales rose, 30%, and Toyota sold 82%, in terms of income, outpacing the industry. And they said that as things became more open, people started buying cars. Another one that is also looking to go back to pre-pandemic or might already be in the works is Cebu Pacific, which is jumping by 2.5%. They mentioned that they're going to be restoring or intending to restore more than 100% of the pre-pandemic domestic capacity in April. They said right now they're operating at 96% of pre-pandemic levels already, and they had, get this, 200% increase in daily average flights for both domestic and international combined. So if you're one of the ones that have booked a Cebu Pacific revenge travel flight, you're one of the, thousands of people that have gone back. They did mention flights from Manila to places like Boracay, Cebu have actually exceeded 2019 already, Jess. So taking a look at Cebu Pacific, trading at 45 pesos and 70 centavos.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. COVID-19 was the third leading cause of deaths in the country last year. Data from the PSA show that there were over 760,000 deaths in 2021, and the top causes were ischemic heart diseases with around 130,000, followed by cerebrovascular diseases with more than 74,200. Meanwhile, deaths associated with COVID-19 reached over 74,000. These are casualties classified as virus identified at the time of death. If we include the over 30,000 people who died from COVID-19 that are not identified at the time of death, that would total 105,000, making it the second leading cause of death last year.
And this from the Philippine Star. The Bangko Sentral reports that loans extended by banks to MSMEs reached over 207 billion pesos as of last month. Banks extended these loans to small businesses as compliance with the central bank's reserve requirement ratio, or RRR. BSP Governor Ben Diokno says the latest figure was a sharp improvement from the 8.7 billion pesos in MSME loans reported as of April of 2020. Back in 2020, the Monetary Board slashed the RRR for universal and commercial banks by 200 basis points and for thrift, rural, and cooperative banks by 100 basis points to cushion the impact of the pandemic on the economy.
The DICT says it needs to invest about 50 billion pesos over the next 3 years to develop digital infrastructure. Acting Secretary Ray Caintic said most of the budget will be used to build the country's fiber infrastructure. Caintic said they are optimistic that they will be given the necessary budget. After all, he said the government should have realized by now, especially with the pandemic, that digital infrastructure is the right investment to be done at the moment.
And again, from the Philippines Star, the Asian Development Bank is teaming up with the Labor Department for a business and employment recovery program in the Philippines. The multilateral lender said the program will focus on addressing the gap of women who were displaced in the labor market. The recovery program will include skills training, livelihood grants, and childcare assistance. For the past 2 years, Filipinas and youth in the labor sector bore the brunt of job losses due to the pandemic. Those aged 15 to 24 accounted for up to 28% of total job cuts in the Philippines, whereas Filipino workers represented 44% of all the job losses.
China maintains that it has sovereign rights over the Panatag Shoal. This after the Philippine Coast Guard condemned a Chinese ship's recent close-distance maneuvering in Bajo de Masinloc. Marian Enriquez with the details.
In this video taken last March 2 at Bajo de Masinloc or Scarborough Shoal, a Chinese Coast Guard vessel can be seen moving close to the Philippine Coast Guard vessel BRP Malabrigo. The PCG condemned the close maneuvering as it violates the 1972 international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. But the China's foreign ministry insisted they have sovereignty over Scarborough Shoal. Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin urged the Philippines respect China's supposed sovereignty and avoid interfering with their Coast Guard. But is this really the case? Based on a UN arbitral ruling in 2016, both China and the Philippines have traditional fishing rights in Scarborough Shoal. For international studies and security expert Romel Banlawi, China needs to be called out. Better if it's the president himself who makes the statement.
Dapat paulit-ulit natin na iparamdam sa China na hindi natin sinasang-ayunan yung ganyang mga klaseng gawain at hindi gawain yan ng isang responsableng bansa.
But the most that the palace came up with is a statement. It said the Philippines will continue to exercise full sovereignty over Bajo de Masinloc and the surrounding EEZ and continental shelf. For Banlawi, failure to condone China, said Banlawi, may only lead to more aggression.
Kung maulit yung ganitong klaseng insidente, tumataas talaga ang panganib na baka magkaroon ng aksidente sa dalawang bansa na mag-udyot ng direct military action.
Reports of the new aggression come at a time when the Philippines is conducting its largest balikatan exercises yet with the United States. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea confirms that the Philippines has already lodged a diplomatic protest against Beijing over the incident. Chairperson Hermogenes Esperon explains that close encounters are normal among countries with conflicting claims in certain areas. But he notes that the Philippine government will continue to stand by our sovereign rights over our exclusive economic zone under the UNCLOS and the arbitral ruling.
There may be counterclaims, but we, as a nation, will stand by our established sovereign rights and sovereignty over the area.
In other news, the MMDA proposes 2 new number coding schemes to ease the heavy traffic in Metro Manila. In his presentation to President Duterte, MMDA Chairperson Romando Artes said the first proposal is the so-called odd-even scheme, which seeks to reduce traffic by up to 50%. Under this, vehicles with registration plates ending with odd numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 will be covered by the number coding scheme on Mondays and Thursdays. Meanwhile, those with plates ending with even numbers will be banned on Tuesdays and Fridays. This will only be implemented during rush hour between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. The second proposed scheme aims to cut down traffic by 40%. Vehicles with plates ending with the numbers flashed on your screens will not be allowed to ply the public roads on corresponding days. The MMDA notes that the original scheme currently being implemented only reduces traffic volume by 20%. And based on recent data, Artes says 60 to 70% of the 300,000 vehicles sold last year enter Metro Manila.
Marami pong suggestion kung paano mababawasan ang traffic sa Kamaynilaan. Pero ang nagmarka po ay ang agreement ng bawat isa na sobra po ang dami ng sasakyan dito sa Kamaynilaan at kailangan po talaga i-reduce, Mr. President. Last year alone, Mr. President, 300,000 vehicles po ang nabenta at 60 to 70% po niyan ay pumapasok sa NCR.
Dami na talagang sasakyan sa Metro
Oo nga,
Manila.
mag-carpool na tayo, Jess.
And that's quite confusing also. But let's see how that plays out. That's a first look into the business day this Wednesday, March 30, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.